This podcast episode is sponsored by Salesforce.org. Salesforce.org is the social impact centre of Salesforce, focused on partnering with a global community of changemakers. They provide access to powerful technology that empowers changemakers to build a better world. Salesforce.org's Education Cloud gives higher education institutions a single shared view of students, alumni and staff in an integrated CRM platform to create personalised experiences at scale, transforming learner engagement into lifelong relationships. Hi everyone, I hope you've been very well. Welcome to this next episode of The Edge, Accelerating Higher Education, and part of our Season 2 of our podcast series with Salesforce.org, where we take a fresh look at higher education and digital transformation. First of all, thanks for all the positive messages from our listeners, including from Bethany Colwell, a one-to-one digital integration technology specialist who has just moved into the field of user experience, who wrote, "Hey Sophie, I just discovered your pod and now you are my new favourite walking buddy. Interesting to hear that leadership in the UK seem way more prepared for this madness than here in the southern US. Thanks for what you do." Well, thank you very much, Bethany, and I hope that you're listening to this whilst walking along somewhere lovely. And I must say that interpretation of events is very generous of you. Indeed, since our last episode on campus reopening, universities here in the UK have struggled with COVID outbreaks among the student population, with many questions arising around the requisite student experience on campus and off. In the north of the UK, major COVID outbreaks have been reported at Newcastle University, Northumbria University and Durham University, to name but a few all over the country, and with many of these institutions turning to fully online learning just weeks after reopening their face-to-face teaching on campus. Why wasn't online learning the go-to, ask parents and student associations, and how are we going to go about our traditional Freshers' Week endeavours and good quality learning, ask students. In this episode, we seek to explore how the student experience is being created and supported in 2020 at our higher education institutions. In conversation with leaders and students from across EMEA and the US, we ask, how is the university experience stacking up versus student expectations?
The intent to innovate is there. The energy to innovate is there as well. But the systems within the universities are not ready.
How are universities adapting to support careers readiness in 2020?
I think, all of the conversations that we're having are about how what's happened with COVID is making us really reflect ourselves and rethink about what we need to be doing to help enable our students, both in terms of working out what they want to do with in their careers, career planning, how we help get them connected to employers, how we can bring in alumni, how we can think about different types of skills, like Kate mentioned with the entrepreneurship skills, and to make it more of a sort of rounded education that they're having within universities. So I think career services are really responding very quickly to this, which is great, but we've still got a lot to learn.
How are students co-creating the student experience they want to see? And what can universities do more of?
Are we using some of our time wrongly, and could we be using technological advances to just make sure that we focus on the things that matter whilst continuing to do the things that we know students need?
And if these are questions that you are currently wrangling with, I would urge you to go and check out the ebook available in conjunction with this episode, titled Making the Most of the New Normal, delivering an outstanding digital student experience, and you can find to download among our show notes. To begin, let's get to know this week's guests. First question, please could you introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Rex Béchu. I'm French, and I just graduated from the University of Sheffield, where I used to be the International Students Officer. And following my year as International Students Officer, I was asked to be the chair of the first student advisory group for UKISA, UK Council for International Student Affairs, for anyone who doesn't know. And I've just finished my term, and I'm handing over to Nebu.
Hi, I'm Nebu George. I'm from India. I'm from Mumbai originally. I am a PhD student at Bangor University in North Wales, and my topic is geochemical archaeology. I did my undergrad and master's at Bangor as well, and I've been at Bangor since 2013. And I have been also working as an international student ambassador here at Bangor since 2014, and found out about the opportunity to become an international student ambassador with UKISA under their RIA International campaign, and applied to it in about January. And since late February onwards, I have been part of the UKISA team of ambassadors. And we had Rex as our chair, and it's only recently that I took over the job of being the chair for Student Advisory Group.
That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, thank you both. And Rex, you were sort of the Student Advisory Group chair as this pandemic sort of unfolded, and then Nebu, you have sort of taken that over as we've gone into this new September term. So I wanted just to start, if you could both give your experience of studying now. So where you are, is that a kind of hybrid experience? Are you in any form of lockdown, or what's that kind of feel like at the moment?
I can go first if you want. So I'm currently studying at ESTP, which is a business school in Paris. So I've recently moved back to France, and I think it's fair to say that things are a little different when it comes to the lockdown or COVID measures in France at the moment. But right now, the school has gone into a hybrid mode as of this week. Because of new governmental restrictions, we can only have half the students on campus. So what the school has done is that they've split the students by family names. And we are doing 1 week with students from A to I, and then the other week, which is next week, where everybody who's from A to I will be online and the rest of the students will be on campus. So at the moment I'm on campus, and next week I'll be online. And this is a bit strange, but it seems to work. So we get a bit of, live classes and a bit of online classes.
Nebu, as well, you were sort of giving your experience before we started recording of teaching in this context, but I just wondered what your own experience has been like recently as well.
Well, first off, during lockdown, it was a sudden change to online study and remote work, but it was quite difficult as well because, my work involves a lot of lab work and field trips as well. So all that had to be shut down, which meant several delays with my PhD work. And in terms of students, almost all of their study was switched to online, with online lectures and online exams or open book exams, or everything done entirely online. But with the start of new semester, Bangor University essentially is going for a blended approach where all your lectures are online and all this, as far as possible, the seminars are done face-to-face. And recently I started a teaching assistant job with my department as well. So I am leading the seminars where we used to have lectures in larger rooms. We have seminars with up to 10 students at a time. And so even if there's in a module about 60 students, we are divided into about 6 groups and at different times. So 10 students in a large group sitting at a distance of at least 2 meters from each other. And that's how they're going about at the moment. But it's different because that's the only sort of face-to-face interaction students have in person, but rest everything has gone online. And that also means the extracurricular activities or the essential bit of the first university student experience. Everything has gone online.
Our agenda was and always is just trying to cover all bases of international student support, making sure that we we don't have just good international student support, but outstanding international student support. We have so many international students in the UK. The University of Sheffield, when I was ISO, had over 10,000 international students. And so, what do we do to specifically help international students and to not just provide support to all students and think we've covered all bases? So I think that, that's part of the agenda pre-COVID, and it still is the agenda post-COVID. But I think COVID has kind of highlighted some things that were, particularly hard for international students. You're talking about what international students went through, and it's important to distinguish international students who were able to go back home during that time and international students who had to quarantine in the UK. And, I think both are difficult in a different way. If you have to quarantine away from home and away from your family, you feel very, very easily and very quickly isolated, especially if there's, a time difference between the UK and your home country. I think that makes it, you're already away from your family when you're an international student. And just not knowing when you'll be able to go back home, not knowing when you'll be able to leave your house. They're like both very stressful situations. So I think there was that part of international students that were quarantining in the UK, and then international students that were able to go back home, but that then felt, they were far away from university. Once again, if there was a time difference, adapting to online lectures at maybe in the middle of the night, that can be very difficult. And just feeling like you're getting the same amount of support from the university when you're away, sometimes that can be tricky.
It's a Tuesday afternoon here in the UK, and we have Victoria and Kate with us. So thanks so much for joining us on the Edtech podcast. My first question is, please can you tell us who you are and what you do?
I'm Victoria Wade. I'm Head of Careers for the Specialist Colleges of the University of London, working for the Careers Group, University of London. So it's my responsibility to head up the careers services across our colleges, including the Royal Veterinary College and St George's Medical School, the School of Advanced Study, and many others.
And I'm Kate Daubney. I am currently Head of Careers and Employability, which is the careers service of King's College London and one of the services of the Careers Group. And in October, I'm going to become the Director of the Careers Group, and I'll also be setting up the University of London's new Centre of Excellence for Careers and Employability.
Victoria, first question to you. What are some of the schemes that the College Careers Service have in place to assist with careers readiness when we think about more usual times than perhaps 2020?
Alongside the traditional offer that we give of one-to-one appointments, workshops, webinars, and careers fairs, we also work a lot with employers to help support our students with gaining internships and business placements and networking opportunities. We work within academic programs and with our academic colleagues to ensure that as many students as possible are supported, and that the employability skills that they are gaining are not seen as separate to the courses that they're studying, but as something that's intrinsic that they gain from their studies and their extracurricular activities. We also do a lot of work online. So even before the COVID outbreak, career services have been working online delivery. One of the colleges that I head up is purely distance learning students, so they always do all of their learning online. So in that capacity, we were able to create a self-directed online careers and employability related learning platform, which encompassed a number of different things. So we created a career planning module, which we launched to 42,000 students, which is a structured online learning activities, of which it combines the students' ability to learn about how to create their own career plan, as well as linking to University of London online library and having input from global employers. And it enables the students to do that in their own time. And coupled with that, we created careers cafes and careers drop-ins to help with student engagement and connectedness. So because we've got students from across the globe, we wanted to help facilitate their learning from each other and a way that they can learn and exchange ideas through us, facilitating it and helping them to do that. So we really do put students at the heart of everything we do, and to make sure that we are creating career services that are accessible and engaging for all of our students and relevant for them, and something that they are going to find useful.
So my name is Fashida Zafar. I am a first-generation refugee child from Afghanistan, and I've been working at the Erasmus University Rotterdam now for 8 years. And my journey started at the Erasmus School of Law in Rotterdam as well. And in 2012, I started working on the revision of our part-time education. Our part-time education is more of a curriculum designed for lifelong learners and people who want to switch careers. Now, back in 2012, a lot of the education in the part-time program took place in the evenings. And yearly, there would be around 18 to 20 students who would enroll for the law program. So my first task at Erasmus University was to come up with a plan to reinvent the part-time education or reinvent the lifelong learning program for law. And I had exactly 4 months to do it, which was great because, time pressure makes you think creatively. And I started with doing a lot of research in other programs and see what kind of didactical methods would work and would not work, what were the pros and the cons, and how to change it bottom up. And I came up with the idea to scratch all the evening classes and concentrate all the education on Friday afternoons, and have 60% of all the teaching done online and 40% of the teaching done face-to-face. So basically a blended learning program. And the reason why I did this is because a lot of the research and a lot of the interviews I held with prior former part-time education students, they basically told me that a lot of the time that they went to university, they went there on campus to socialize, to interact, and to meet new people. And the learning really, really happened at home. So the blended learning program was a way to keep the socialization and the interaction still as a focus for the on-campus learning, and do all the knowledge transfer online. Now, that program started with the idea of we're doing this for 30 students, maybe maximum 30 students per year. And 8 years along the road, we have somewhat over 800 students in that program. And the blended learning approach has been rolled out now over our university in the past couple of years, where we see a lot of other faculties taking the similar approach to tap into new target audiences, but also to modernize their form of education. Now, that was just one project when I started working at Rotterdam University. But a lot of the projects that I've been doing have to do with technology. So I've created a few educational applications, mobile applications, designed a virtual reality courtroom, and a streaming service for legal literature for our students. And all of that basically resulted to Erasmus X.
I am the Director of Industry Solutions at Salesforce.org, focused on the student experience. And so I'm responsible for the solutions and how we go to market with solutions to support the student experience. So everything from student advising, to student service, to career services, and student engagement falls in my bucket. And that's part of the larger education cloud team at Salesforce.org. And so I'm actually really excited to be on with you today to talk to you a bit about the work we've been doing as the kind of broader Education Cloud team, but specifically in this space of the student experience and around career readiness as well. I used to be a teacher for several years before moving over into this space, and gosh, so much has changed. So it's really interesting to see, what it was like then versus now, or even as I was a student. So I get to work on all that fun stuff every day and explore better strategies for supporting the student experience.
So there we have it, an amazing array of experience. And in speaking to these guests, it's clear that when it comes to student experience, especially in 2020, there are a few consensus points that come up. So let's listen in. Now is the time for universities to be bold in their approaches and use of educational technology to refine support for individual students for academic goals, well-being and career readiness. But how? Well, 2 sector reports this year point out that higher education technology implementation has improved, but is still in fact on the most part basic. That's fine in and of itself, but in the joint Advanced HE and HEPI Student Experience Survey of 2020, it states, where advanced technology is used, students are significantly more likely to feel they have received good value and perhaps more significantly, to feel they have learnt a lot and that their skills gained will play a key role in their future. I.e., the use of advanced technology has an effect on what is considered a more positive and productive academic experience. But whilst 2020 has pushed universities to embrace new ways of working, the JISC Student Digital Experience Insight Survey of 2020, collected across 2020, including pre-COVID and after the pandemic started times, showed that not enough use of online technology was collaborative. Certainly, more can be done to be creative with the use of technology in terms of learning design and ambition to develop skills needed in the workplace, to support online friendships and to stop people feeling isolated. In addition, only 55% of surveyed students had created a digital record or portfolio of their learning, and only 20% of students said they used simulations, virtual or augmented reality. But what did our guests think? Having now experienced, this strange situation for 6 months or more, what would you like to see more of from the combination of, technology that is available and the universities together? So, where has technology been useful or less useful, and what would you like to see more of for the student experience?
So in my school at ESCP, we've literally just finished a digital Spark seminar on AI and just some of the ways in which we can use data ethically, but use data to try to better lives of everyone. And I think there are definitely things that universities could be doing using technology. Obviously, right now, we have no other ways to meet and to do lectures and to do career services, online fairs, than to use technology. And I feel like, we've seen a shift of universities starting to use Zoom and, Blackboard Collaborate, things like that. But I think we could definitely see something where we make it just slightly more interactive and just a bit more accessible. And I wonder to what extent we could will use AI and data in a way that just helps students feel like they are, more connected. I wonder, do we connect students that have the same interests so that they can meet with students from all over the world without actually meeting in person, but that care about the same things through our university platforms? Do we use data to ensure that we can better connect alumni with students? We already have mentoring schemes with alumni and students, but do we use it in a way that uses all the extent of the technological advances that we have, or are we still doing it in a kind of mechanical matching way? Are we losing time over those things that we could be using to focus on, for example, bettering our conversations with employers in the UK that don't have tier 2 sponsorship license?
Yes, a great answer. And it made me think of the sort of rather arbitrary nature of students being selected by alphabetical name, A to I, rather than, okay, you guys are going to either work well together or challenge each other because you think differently, and if you could bundle people in that way. But and Nebu, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I'm quite passionate about employability, and I see an opportunity there with us having to switch everything online. And something that often happens is in India, we have something called campus interviews. And for students that are over here to not miss out on those opportunities, let's say it doesn't need to be just about India. For students going back to those to their home countries, and there are these big companies that are invited to universities to conduct to recruit students, essentially. With us having to do everything online, that can be done now with UK universities, where we can invite big companies from China, India, or whichever home country the student might be from, and ask them, we can ask international students to apply to those companies, and probably even arrange for a campus interview such thing, which is essentially a group interview, which can be done over Zoom. And, that way we are promoting international student employability. So I see an opportunity like that over there, where all this while the problem was, it's from a different country. It's, we have the problem of distance, time. Now suddenly that is not that big of a problem.
And Kate, you mentioned earlier on some of the headlines. So just to follow up on that, I mean, I've got here some estimates suggest that new graduates are facing the toughest labour market for 75 years. I wondered how King's and the University of London are approaching that triangulation of, say, students, industry, perhaps your alumni, and then also if people want to go into entrepreneurship. So where perhaps they would have had physical work experience or internships, has any of that sort of pivoted to online, and how you're keeping that conversation going as employers themselves are sort of navigating completely new terrain as well?
Yes, I think that's a really great question. And I think many employers have chosen to sort of back away from a conventional partnership with a career service because they're obviously figuring out some really big questions like, what is the future of our business? How are we going to work going forward? So a lot of employers are currently choosing to do their own thing. They're wanting to connect with students directly. So we've been looking at how we can integrate that into the sort of conventional offering that we might typically have organised, such as, a careers fair is a very classic way of engaging students and employers together. So we've reinvented the careers fair concept as a fortnight of different kinds of digital employer events. So sort of breakfasts and networking and skills sessions and panel events. And we've sort of created a very complex ecosystem of different ways so that students can see the different solutions that employers are bringing. So I think that's the first thing, is employers are experimenting themselves. And I think reassuring students, I think this is a great opportunity to look positively at the fact that things might be different. And I think taking a strategic approach that can be quite challenging. But I think the message to students is look at what employers are doing. Be a little bit critical about that. Think about, why does this work for them? And I think one key area you just mentioned is around internships. So there was a lot of press this summer around the fact that students felt very much the absence of in-person internships. But a number of companies have sort of leapt in with virtual internships. Victoria, do you want to say a bit about the Bright Network?
Yeah, so we joined in with some of the Bright Network who ran some virtual internships, which included employer seminars, and then students would work in groups to do some group work samples. They get feedback on those. They would then have some networking booths where they could speak to employers, as well as getting some CV advice. And it was open to all students across the globe who wanted to take part. They just had to apply for it. But it was really successful in giving students the access to those employers and the learning online to just think about it in a different way.
And I think employers know they've got some work to do on that. I mean, I think currently we might argue that it's a relatively simplistic delivery model, and Victoria's sort of experience of working with distance learning programs shows how far employers can go on creating a slightly more dynamic sort of multi-mode learning and feedback experience. And I'd encourage students actually to talk to employers about that. You know, if you're on an internship, come up with some ideas about different ways for co-creating content. I think we'll talk a little bit later about, you know, what is it that the student is saying? How are they going to sort of present themselves to employers? And I think it's a great example of do an internship and give some feedback about different ways in which it can be done. You mentioned also entrepreneurship. So we are very lucky at King's. We have the Entrepreneurship Institute, and we also have our own resources for students who want to go on and be self-employed. And I think it's quite easy sometimes for students to think that they would only do an entrepreneurship program if they wanted to be an entrepreneur. But we know that employers value very much some of those core skills of entrepreneurship in an intrapreneurial sense within companies. So things like, you know, resilience, disruption, building teams, thinking lean. So we've done a lot of collaborative work with the Entrepreneurship Institute, which has turned out to be very useful now.
So within Erasmus X, we have a mission to challenge the educational status quo by providing a more student or human-centered learning experience with a strong focus on student agency and, of course, emerging technologies, because once a tech geek, always a tech geek is what I always say, in a very complex, innovative setting. And what we actually mean with that is we want to offer students a different, more personalized learning route using technology and giving them the experience, or at least facilitate their experience in working with a lot of stakeholders. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. It's very abstract, very high over, but if we trickle it down and make it more concrete, what we're trying to do is we're trying to engage our partners, our city partners, our governmental partners, our private partners, to work with us in creating new learning experiences for students, where students themselves decide what it is that they want to learn. So the responsibility for the learning is with the student themselves. And a perfect example of that is our currently launched minor, where we actually tell the students, you have to work in a team. You have to use design thinking to find an educational complex problem on our campus or somewhere else in the world, whatever you feel like. And you have to provide us a solution within 10 weeks. But along that project-based learning is a very individual learning line, because what we've done is we have created a rubric where students are forced to think about, what kind of role do I want to play in this team? What kind of skills do I need to possess to be an effective team member? Am I missing skills? Am I lacking certain skills? If so, what am I going to do to obtain those skills? And where am I going to get my knowledge? Because we're not giving them any literature. We're not forcing them to read tons of articles or books or scientific papers. We're basically leaving the whole learning part up to the students. And the fantastic thing is we've just entered our third week. And what I can see already from the assignments is that the students take it extremely seriously, because this is the first time in their academic career where the learning revolves around them. And it doesn't revolve around the teacher or the safety net of an exam, because we don't have a traditional exam. And by breaking open the system, I can already see a huge growth in engagement and motivation. For example, the students, they're already working ahead, and they're already making plans to create their team charter and create their personal lesson plan. And it's fantastic to see how much of creativity comes up when you leave these kids to figure it out themselves.
This is quite bold in a university environment, and in a lot of university environments, this would be quite new. although there is a trend where you start seeing, more spin-off and more kind of ideation activity in higher education, which it needs. But how did you get the sort of the buy-in from the whole university to do this? Because that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. So did you have to do a lot of convincing, or was it an easy job?
I think it's never an easy job, regardless of the university you work in or work at.
Yeah.
I think it's always hard because, universities are usually not the first to adapt to new situations. Let me just say it like that. So yes, of course, there was quite some convincing, quite some mission work to do. I also think that the COVID restrictions and the Corona crisis basically also helped us quite some bits here and there. But what I think is more important to mention is the fact that, yes, this was a really, really tough route. And basically, it took me 8 years from my start in 2012 until, basically January 2020 to get our university to really invest in innovation. What I see happening a lot in many universities who have innovation hubs is that the intent to innovate is there. The energy to innovate is there as well. But the systems within the universities are not ready. They're not ready to accommodate a radical innovation hub. They're not ready to accommodate radical thinkers and have systems in place that support innovation instead of hinder it. And what I mean with that is that the way you see universities and their accountability structures and their governance structures, they're quite a big obstacle for innovators. For example, when you are reporting on your finances and budgets and stuff like that, which is, you would think that's a minor thing, but I think it's quite a large chunk of our work as well. You can see that the systems that are designed are not designed for innovation. They're designed for the regular process management type of work. So what I'm trying to say with that is that although there's a lot of universities who want to really, really be innovative and who want to push radical innovations to reinvent or reimagine education, are still very stuck to old methods and to old customs and traditions and conventions and systems. So
yes.
And that makes it really, really hard to push for real innovation.
I agree. Totally agree. And from where I'm sitting and my sort of exposure and experience with universities is also that this is potentially, especially now, given the situation we're in with COVID and how this is putting new pressures on universities, is that is potentially the biggest hurdle they're facing to kind of turn that ship round to a kind of more forward-looking and innovation-led sort of academic institution. And would you agree with that, or do you think that that's actually one of the smaller things to overcome?
I think I can agree with that. I also think, I really feel that the COVID crisis has shown university what their resiliency is. For example, in 2016, I was drafting the vision for online education for our university. And as a part of that vision, we wanted to create a physical space with a full-decked professional studio. Now, if you think it's hard to gain enough support for your radical ideas, it's even harder to gain support to build a fully decked professional studio, especially when budgets are tight in higher education. I am extremely, extremely proud of our my coworkers, of our board, that they still managed to push through the studio. Because one of the biggest things that I've seen happening here in Rotterdam is that when we went in full lockdown, it took us literally maybe a couple of days before all systems were go to offer online education. So I think I'm not exaggerating if I say that we had 40,000, so that is 40,000 clips, video lectures shot just in a time span of 3 or 4 months. Now, wow. that would have never been possible if we didn't have the right infrastructure. So, and these things, if I look at our university, I'm super happy with our adaptation, with our resiliency. And I'm also extremely proud to be working here because, investing in a project like Erasmus X is basically saying we are going to take this immense risk and figure out if it makes sense, yes or no.
And Kate, you also mentioned at the beginning your work around Careers Service Hub of Excellence, I think it was called, but you can correct me on that. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you have planned with that as well?
I'd love to. I haven't decided quite yet, but So it's the new University of London Centre of Excellence for Careers and Employability. And one of the things that I think will be very important is to capture some of the sorts of work that Victoria's team have been doing with distance learners. So thinking about some very different ways that we engage with students online. Actually, Victoria, it'd be really nice if you could give us an insight perhaps into some of the ways in which one-to-one engagement has been transformed.
Yeah, sure. So traditionally we would have one-to-one interactions with students, whether that was a CV check or some careers guidance, helping students to work out what they want to do, what the next steps are. But that has been quite challenging given the high volume of students that we have and quite minimal resources, because career services are having to do quite a lot with not very much. But equally, there was something there about how could we bring students together to help exchange knowledge and bring that learning into one place. So we created career drop-ins and career cafes, which are guidance sessions which will be facilitated by a careers consultant on a particular topic. And it would be just exactly that, facilitation, rather than the kind of chalk and talk careers consultant telling the students what was going on. It was much more interactive, and the feedback has been really, really great. What we found across the board is that we are still in developing the processes of how we do things and working out what's the most effective. Using digital tools and capabilities means that we have never been more connected to our students as we have them now, but we are continually learning and evolving in this space. So one of the great things we found is that we're able to do new things with students and innovative things, and then get their feedback as to whether that works or not, and adapt it as we need to. And going back to Kate's point about the employers, we are also doing that with employers as well. So getting them on board to do more interactive work with the students, and again, finding out what works and what doesn't.
So I think it would be quite easy to think that a centre of excellence was sort of capturing a permanent way of best practice. But I think what Victoria is describing is something that's quite evolving, and that we're comfortable with the fact that it evolves in real time. And you'll know yourself, Sophie, that in some of the best digital education work, things are co-created. They're quite flexible. They're quite fluid. We're taking feedback from what students want. We're co-creating that experience with the student instead of for the student. So one of the things I think the Centre of Excellence is really going to focus on, and I think digital careers education is inevitably going to be a sort of strong pillar of that, is what are the new ways of using technology platforms to deliver this kind of work that's traditionally been sort of very in-person, one-to-one based. How can we reinvent that?
So it sounds like it's more about sort of ecosystem building, potentially around different industry sectors as well. Obviously it's evolving, but part of those cafe conversations is about creating conversations around specific sectors. Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's completely spot on. We are finding that does create the most kind of that sense of community that you mentioned, and also the kind of very key learning that actually is relevant to those students because they're doing a similar course, and we can bring on employers who are prevalent in those spaces, in that sector. So yeah, it is building those communities based on the courses quite specifically. And equally, we're hoping to spin off of that, potentially thinking about some online alumni mentoring schemes, doing more specific type careers fairs, mentoring programs with employers. So it's enabling us to, as a stepping off point.
The next consensus point: students expect careers development, guidance and industry networking from their universities, COVID or no COVID. In the Advanced HE and HEPI Student Experience Survey of 2020, the authors write, overall, it is striking that gaining the right kind of work experience is seen as most critical, slightly ahead of the more academically focused goal of getting the best degree possible. Many current courses have an employability focus running through them, with placements often forming a key element. However, with the current COVID-19 crisis, there is understandable concern as to whether the same level of placements will be available to students this year and next. In the conversations with guests for this episode, this expectation to forge industry opportunity in a smart way came through very clearly. So, how can technology help?
Recently, I was actually busy doing some research. I conducted research with roughly 45 individuals across 32 higher ed institutions, several of which were really fantastic European institutions, including the University of Plymouth, Portsmouth, I can't think of Bucerius Law School, LSE. And in those conversations, I increasingly came across this need for these departments to better prepare their students for careers and really embed it into their academic experience. So it's not seen as something entirely separate. And honestly, the research really reinforced the challenges that we've been hearing when it comes to career readiness, and probably you have too. So, for example, at the 2020 Davos meeting, the World Economic Forum predicted that in Europe alone, the impending skills gap will lead to 1.67 million unfilled vacancies for ICT professionals. And, we know and we are hearing over and over again that institutions have to support different types of students and provide opportunities then for learning new skills. And undoubtedly, there are going to be concerns now about the impact of the current pandemic on the economy and job offers. And also, in a recent survey, we saw that 51% of UK respondents said that the COVID-19 pandemic has made them rethink entirely their career path. So, this really speaks to then the importance of the careers office at a university thinking of this as a long-term career strategy and really, rethinking how to engage employers and kind of move away from that siloed approach. And so, for us, we're asking ourselves, where does Salesforce fit in, right? Where does the Salesforce technology fit in? And typically, careers offices have or need three main technologies to support their work, and they're largely complementing each other. First and foremost, typically a careers office will have a career information and resources tool that includes those job listings and applications. They'll likely have a web conferencing tool combined with some sort of virtual event management to take care now of virtual career events, given the pandemic, and all the planning and the handling of those. And then there's this platform that brings it all together from a data and a relationship perspective to create this sort of network of support around students. And that's really where Salesforce comes into this with our platform approach to supporting this. We have 4 pillars of the Salesforce career solution that we've been working on to enhance career readiness and employer relations. The first pillar is the student advising that I mentioned earlier. We have a purpose-built advising solution, Salesforce Advisor Link, that can really be the foundation for a lot of the great work that careers advisors and career coaches are doing on the ground in advising and guiding on life paths. And then there is the education piece. How do we ensure that students are educated towards the jobs they want to get and the impact they want to make? And, we have tools that enable skills development as well. The third one is tracking. So using that data in the platform, as I mentioned, using the constituent relationship management capabilities, or otherwise known as CRM, to really engage employers and track those student outcomes. And finally, we have a lot of events providers or virtual event management providers in our Salesforce ecosystem. that can do a lot of that planning around the careers events. And, we know it's more important now more than ever to personalize virtual career and employer events. So, the end goal for us is helping students to really unlock access to those fulfilling careers, giving them the tools that they need, putting them on a path to success, and really helping to engage those employers that they might want to work for. And, the idea is to really democratize access to opportunity and increase career readiness and life purpose for all students. And, we do believe, and as I've been looking at this for so long now, and I think back to my own experiences in the field itself, every student can be set up for career success and get the dream job they want and make the impact they want to make, regardless of who they know, where they live, or even what school they attend. So, it makes me really happy to perhaps end on that note and to have shared with you what we're hearing.
The main reason that I joined UKISA and the VN International Student Ambassador Program was for that very important word, employability, especially among the international students sector, is not something that's spoken about much. And even in terms of data, as in the evidence base for how many of the international students who do come here have gone on to various different kinds of jobs, or have they been successful or not, or any kind of data from the alumni as well. It's not very concrete. We don't have a strong evidence base. So considering that with this year, with so many delays, hiccups, with the economy shrinking and studies online, with practical field work or work experience not as the same as our predecessors, I don't know how the current and incoming students are being made more employable in an economy in the UK or worldwide where the competition is going to be among the toughest in years. And it also makes you wonder, is it really worth traveling so far away from your country to gain a degree that, for now at least, seems mostly online? That is why this year there's cross-sector employability group for international students that has been set up, which is led by UKISA, ACCAS, Universities UK, and several other organizations. And they are spearheading to encourage universities and the government to help international students. One of the ways is to actually get universities and employers, especially medium and small businesses, get talking so that they know that, okay, there is this post-study work visa coming in, and it is actually easy for you to employ these students. And it's valuable that they actually contribute to the economy as well, because these are highly skilled students that are coming out of UK universities. And rather than causing an essential brain drain from UK back to their home countries, or driving students away back to the home countries, those students can be utilized here to help the economy over here.
This brings us on to our final point that came out in the chats. That is, that student experience is a joint venture and not something for the university to impart. Students must make their voice heard and get ready to co-design their wish-for experience together with the university colleagues. On this point, there is some reason to be optimistic. Alison Johns, the Chief Executive for Advance HE, stated in the Student Survey of 2020, which I highly recommend that you dig through, that it is interesting to see that the data suggests that remote learning post-lockdown has brought some closer engagement between teaching staff and students, and this has even led to improved directed independent learning. We must harness and sustain this progress into the new era. For very obvious reasons, we need to listen extremely careful to student comments about educational technology. Now, this is encouraging stuff, and I just hope the systems Fashida talks of allows for more of this listening, as we know, no two students are the same, so student experience needs to be refined and personalised for part-time, full-time and international students, as just some examples.
Something I would say is that always there are avenues and resources available within the university. Just students need to raise it up whenever there is a need, because one of the biggest problems even I myself used to be quite reserved and wouldn't say until there's a dire need. But whenever you speak to anyone in the university, there will be someone who will guide you to the right place. For example, at Bangor University, one of the things they're doing in case students have to self-isolate is help with getting them groceries. And other thing is something like counseling services. Mental health is often perhaps not spoken enough during these times, and students who are in lockdown, that is something they do need. So perhaps something like counseling services for students in lockdown is quite important. And that is, some ways where you could support students who have to self-isolate for whatever reason that might be.
In this podcast, we're also addressing the fact that universities and higher education is going to face some incredible challenges, which are kind of probably more accentuated now because of COVID. And what I'm hearing from you is that throughout your kind of university career, dealing with the kind of law side first, is that you sort of focused on a number of things. You focused on innovation, you focused on student engagement, and you to kind of help that student engagement, you also focused on flexibility. Now, these are kind of three really important key facets of kind of strategies that universities need to consider. And I think, this is quite a good segue to kind of get us into Erasmus X. But would you agree that these are kind of linchpins for what you're going to be talking about, explaining to us what Erasmus X is all about and why you sort of feel this project is also really important and obviously has the buy-in from the university?
Yes. I totally agree with you on these 3 points. I think the focus of innovation comes from the need to keep your education up to date. The way I see education and the way I've seen education when I first started working at the Erasmus University is that although we have a huge advancement in technology, our learning methods, methodologies, but also our learning support was still stuck in a past decade. And the way I saw it is that we can use technology to enhance education and to create more flexibility, but also to make education more accessible for people who are in a different phase of their life or who are in a different country even. But in order to do so, we need to understand what the actual student needs are. So instead of taking the traditional approach of thinking we as a university know what our student needs, actually engage the student in the discussion and have that conversation about, what the student actually needs and how we can actually support that need. And I think if I look at Erasmus X and how that started, it also started with a very student-centered approach. Throughout my career, I've been in touch with a lot of students and I've coached a lot of students, I've mentored a lot of students, and all these students had a certain thing in common, is that in some way or in some phase of their study, they felt that, they were doing the same repetitive task all over. And so they started looking for, obtaining certain skills that they probably need in their professional careers. They started to look for that somewhere else. And throughout my chats also with a lot of companies that are in my network, I noticed that all these companies would retrain the students the moment they graduated. And I started to wonder, what are we not doing at a university? Why is this need for companies to retrain our students when, we actually believe that we give them really high quality education? So by having that student-centered approach and having chats with them, having pizza nights and interviews with them, and having, just having students interview other students to figure out what is exactly the student need, that basically formed the basis of the Erasmus X project.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
To do.
Okay. As you know that I'm a big fan. So just one question, just to kind of make it a bit clearer to the audience, in terms of how does a student get onto this Erasmus X program, and what kind of students or skill sets do they need to come on the program? Because I believe the program is like an ancillary program, like the students volunteer to come on it, but it's not like a formal degree program. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So basically, right now, the minor is a part of the bachelor program for our Faculty of Social Sciences and Behavior. This minor was created to support students who couldn't go on an exchange program. So this is a really COVID-related project. But in our other projects, where a lot of students do project work with us as an extracurricular activity, these students come from all over the place. Usually they're undergraduate students. We have some master students as well. There's no real prerequisites or criteria or requirements that they have to fulfill to be able to do a project with us. But if they want to do a project with us, we do want them to understand that they have to go 100%, and it's a full commitment, and it's not just a project for the sake of doing a project. But what we see is that students come up to us with ideas. For example, we had a project surrounding sustainability in the beginning of this year, and this was a student. She came up to us and she said, I have 5 stakeholders and I have this many students who want to work on this problem. Can you help us design it? And we basically said, well, we can facilitate you in the process, but this is a learning opportunity for you and your fellow students. So why don't you design it? And it was really fantastic to see that without any prior knowledge of design thinking or behavioral science, because these were students from communication, from IBA, from economics, from law, they were all together. They basically designed their entire journey themselves together with the stakeholders. And our role in that project was very simple. We were only there to guide the students, to coach them through tough questions, and to have a critical view every once in a while and ask them really tough questions, as in, are you sure you want to solve this problem? Is this really a problem? Why is it a problem? Or to direct them to new stakeholders, as in, maybe you should have a chat with this company or that company, or talk with some software engineers for your solution. But we didn't do much more than facilitating and guiding the process. So the students actually taught themselves. So we're trying to host seminars and sessions and events where students basically present their work to us, to stakeholders, to third parties, whoever is interested. And then from there, depending on how clever their solution is, we will have a look at the further development of that solution. And right now at Erasmus University, next to Erasmus X, we have another project called Erasmus Ventures. And this is a project where startups are validated and facilitated in growing and in developing Edtech solutions. But basically any kind of startup can enlist. But maybe there's a good collaboration with them too, to see if we can actually further develop the student solutions.
Students are having a rough ride this year, no doubt. But if they can document and articulate their experiences, this may be a defining factor of their future success.
Yeah, but coming back to the first years and their experience, it's been difficult because in my role as an international ambassador with Bangor University, I usually help out with welcoming international students to Bangor as well. But the one thing that they had to do was turn everything online. And usually we would have these airport pickups every year where I would also go and have freshly arrived international students pick them up in the university buses, get them back to Bangor in that 2-hour journey. You're seeing the place for the first time. It kind of feels like a holiday. I remember my first time was essentially like that. Coming here, I felt, I was from Manchester Airport to Bangor. It's about two and a half hour journey going through different places. It was great, beautiful. And I was talking to so many people from the university, the ambassadors back then. I was so much looking forward to it. It was always like, it was like a holiday feeling for me. But suddenly this year it's changed entirely. And people who did go for airport pickups. I mean, no longer ambassadors were not allowed to go for airport pickups. Only university staff, a couple of them did go. And in the buses, it was, number of students were considerably reduced. And with all the safety precautions, and rightly so, with all the safety precautions in place, I'm sure it was quite difficult for most of them, as if I'm sure it didn't feel like coming to a holiday destination. It would. I'm not sure how glad or how excited they were to start the new year in such a difficult situation. And once students were here, all the events, the welcoming events, they were turned online. So things like we used to have a walking trip of the town where you used to go around showing, where's the closest supermarkets, where are the different buildings of university. We had to cancel all that. So this year it was just done on an interactive map or through online Zoom meetings. And one of the things they did do was, which was nice, having a cocktail session online, welcoming students so that we get talking. But what I do find really difficult for first years is that it's going to be really difficult, even something as simple as making friends, because it is in your first year that you make your close buddies, who you stick with for the whole year. But suddenly that's taken away. It's rather difficult. But then again, universities have been doing some really good things as well. For example, arranging, even though it's online sessions, there is a way of interacting. They're trying to do as best as they can. It's not that they're not. Things like clubs and societies. One of my close friends, he is involved in a Lindy Hop society. So the way they are managing at the moment is by doing online sessions. And encouraging people to do, staying at home, dancing. But it's not the same, of course, but it's still something. It's not, entirely taken away. So it's difficult, I would say, to say the least.
And Kate, I wondered, so in the context, as an example, if we think about King's College, how has that university adapted to supporting student careers pathways during the turmoil of this year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's sort of, in a sense, an existential question that we asked ourselves this year. So I think we've done a number of different things. One is that I think we have put a lot of focus on the students' own sense of their own career journey. So their self-awareness, their career readiness, and helping students really be confident about where they are on their journey. We call that journey discover, focus, action. And for example, I think it can be quite easy to panic if you don't know where you are on your career journey, and then you can't calibrate yourself to take advantage of the right information. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on, lots of stories, lots of kind of concern and anxiety in the job market. But if you don't know where you are on your career journey, you don't know really which of that information is relevant to you. So for example, if you don't know what career you want, it can be very easy to panic about not knowing what to put on a CV. But actually, if you're still figuring out what you want to do, then a CV isn't where you want to be focusing your interests. You want to be thinking about, how am I going to decide what I really want to do? How do I look for the right research in the marketplace? So that's been one quite core element. And we have done that underpinned by what seems obvious to say, but as Victoria mentioned, a digital careers service. So we thought a lot about how we could make it easier for students to access all the information and all the services that we normally offer at a time that suits them in a way that suits them. So for us, that's meant a combination of synchronous and asynchronous content. And we've delivered that across a number of different modes of delivery. So we've been doing virtual one-to-ones, obviously using Teams, but we also have videos and podcasts and texts and interactive e-learning. So a range of different styles, because many of our students actually actually currently are around the world and not in London. And I think sort of building on that, one of the things that we've really focused on, I mentioned this a moment ago, is the importance of curating information. So understanding that students are completely overwhelmed by all this information about the labour market, which sectors are up, which sectors are down, what should I be doing, how do I plan ahead, what will the future look like? And so, even tracking that information, let alone processing it and understanding it, has become even more important for us to help students navigate through that information and understand what does it mean to them, whatever stage of their career journey they're on. And then finally, a big piece of work that makes King's quite distinctive is we have a very unique approach to surfacing the employability value, particularly attributes and skills from people's subject study. So helping you understand what is it about being a historian that makes me attractive to a graduate employer, for example, or a physicist or a mathematician. So we've done quite a lot of work to help students get the value from the experience they're having right now. So obviously everybody's worried about the future, what will happen when I leave, but let's focus on what you're actually going to get out of your degree while you're with us. So those are sort of 4 different angles that we've taken on helping students at the current time. I think one of the key contrasts is that many of the students taking distance learning programs are people in the middle of their careers. So they might be taking it as a pivot. They're using it as a change of direction. The flip of that is that many of the students coming into King's are probably coming in thinking, oh, hey, I'd like to do this thing. And then thinking maybe that sector doesn't exist after COVID. Maybe this particular work isn't going to be quite what I thought it was going to be. So we're also trying to support and enable students to be more agile about their career journeys and to understand that there are more than one way to get to a destination. And to then have sort of sufficient self-awareness, sufficient sort of understanding of their skills and how those can be deployed to different sectors. And I think that's where the sort of sector specialism that Victoria was describing becomes so important, is for students who's, okay, this configuration of my analytical skills works in this way in tax audit, and it works in that way in journalism, and it works in this way in consultancy. That's really helpful for helping students become a bit more agile.
The way that people learn is changing because of online capabilities. I've been recently watching some TikTok videos that young people have been doing around careers, which have been really engaging and interesting to watch. That might be another way that students are getting information around careers and career planning. And it's about making sure that we are on top of that and that we are helping students to have access to all of the kind of resources that they need and be able to make the relationships that they need to make to be successful.
I think that's a really good point. And I think we as services need to be more agile. It's not enough that we created a digital careers service. Our whole means of engagement will need to evolve because students and, older learners are looking in a diversity of places for that source material. If you'd said 5 years ago that a student would look on TikTok for a careers video, I think we'd be looking at each other going, what? But I think it does transform that. Victoria, I'm curious, I have a perception, I'm sure many people do, that careers is always added on. So how is it different in an online program that's principally delivered as a digital education experience for students? How does that careers sort of element sit? Do you think it's more integrated? Do you think students experience it in a more integrated way because the whole package is online?
The students are used to using online tools for their learning because they're distance learning students. They don't, in most part, they don't have very much, if any, face-to-face interaction or offline interaction, although sometimes they do through teaching centres. But in the most part, they are used to using those digital online tools and learning on an online basis, which is helpful for us because it means that they do see it as kind of much more integrated, which is great. But one thing we have noticed is that a lot of students, even though they are doing their learning online, don't really think about and reflect on the skills that they are gaining and demonstrating by being distance learning students or doing online learning. And I think that's a really interesting challenge that we have, which kind of is the same with all of our kind of interactions we have with students, is trying to enable them to realize the skills that they are gaining across the board, reflecting on that and then demonstrating that to employers, because those things are going to be really valuable to employers.
I think that's a really critical point that we're trying to get across to students at the moment, is what is it that is different about this experience that will help you communicate to an employer that you are agile, flexible, adaptable, able to look at things in different ways? How has this teaching and learning experience that's so different to what you're expecting? How has that helped you think differently about what you can do and what you can bring? And I think there's much more that we can do around that. And I think if online delivery and digital education more broadly as a sort of creative space for students to learn in becomes more established in years to come, that's going to become quite a critical factor. And I think employers would do well to look out for it. And I think students would do well to find good ways to articulate it.
And finally, some thoughts to leave you with at the end of this episode. So, last question then. What resources would you like to share with our listeners in this space? So, any books, people, projects, podcasts, or other things that have helped shape your thinking in this area, and perhaps the things that you sort of go back to and like to share with others?
Yeah, there's a lot of information in this space, which is great, and lots more emerging, which is fantastic. It's a really engaging area to be looking into. And actually I've been doing some small online courses, some free online courses myself, and even putting myself into the shoes of the students by being an online learner as well is incredibly helpful when I'm thinking about that. But I mean, I certainly would advocate looking at Wonk HE website and listening to their podcast, which is always really great. The AGCAS resources, which is the Association of Graduate Careers Advisory Services. It's got lots of resources and information in this area. Think tanks such as HEPI and the IFS are really useful to listen to. And of course, we're really lucky as well because the careers group work across so many different career services. We can learn a lot from each other, which is fantastic. And we also have the University of London Centre for Distance Education. We can learn through them too.
I'm going to take a slightly more personalised view of this, which is to encourage people to think about what speaks to you. So, Victoria mentioned TikTok videos. If that speaks to you, if that's a great way for you to learn and you're inspired by that, then that's a good place to start. I think sometimes I always feel I'm giving a recommendation. I'm sort of talking about my own view of what I experience. So I think friends, your peers, your family are always a really great resource, whether you're a professional or whether you're a student. And I think also there is an enormous amount of information overload. I can't keep up with all the things that Victoria just listed. My reading list is massive and I never get to the bottom of it. So I think building in really proper structured time to actually reflect on what you're reading or listening to or watching is really, really important, so that you don't just sort of overwhelm yourself with all the stuff that you might sort of have access to. And so self-awareness becomes really important then to making good decisions. Why was that meaningful to me? Who am I? How does it all fit together? What have I learned? And I think a question that I know is going to come up a lot from employers in the coming months when they're meeting students is, what did you do in lockdown? How can you show me that you're sort of tolerant of ambiguity and uncertainty? And even the smallest things, the smallest shifts, the smallest sense of self-awareness, I think is quite a powerful thing to talk about. So I think I would say, perhaps to wrap up in thinking about resources, is don't feel that you're looking for one answer. It's like the London Underground map, isn't it? There's always a number of ways to get from A to B. And looking at the resources, what speaks to you? That's where I would start from. Look at stuff, surf through it, but what speaks to you?
There's a sentence that I've heard once at a graduation speech that I was attending, not for my graduation, but and the speaker said the sentence, "Never let a crisis go to waste." And I think this has never had more sense than it does now. I think it's an incredibly difficult time, but this is something that we've gone through as a society, as students, and a crisis is something to not let go to waste. Don't be afraid to use that time for good.
That's the end of this episode. I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you drop us a quick review or rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. The algorithms love it, as do the humans who think, oh, I might check that out. You can also come back next time for a new episode and fresh look at digital transformation and changed priorities. Thanks so much for listening in, and huge thank you to all of our guests this week, Salesforce.org for supporting, and Carla Ertz for the interview with Fashida. Don't forget the ebook available in conjunction with this episode, titled Making the Most of the New Normal, which is available in our show notes and features up-to-date case studies from multiple unis. For all other show notes, including resource and reading recommendations, go to theedtechpodcast.com, and you can continue the conversation online at Podcast Edtech and at Salesforce Org. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.